I drove up to my son-in-law Mark's house without warning. It was just supposed to be a quick, friendly stop. But the moment I saw my wife's car parked in his driveway, my stomach turned cold. She was supposed to be across town, visiting her sister. My first thought was, maybe she just swung by to drop something off. But deep down, something felt rotten. Something told me to stay quiet, to keep my distance, and to find out what was really going on. I parked my car down the street, slipped around the side of the house, and crouched by the living room window. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And then, I heard voices. Her voice, my wife. She wasn't talking like a sister-in-law. She wasn't talking like family. She was whispering furiously, her tone sharp, intimate, angry. And the person she was whispering to was Mark, my own son-in-law. Before I dive deeper, let me say this. If you enjoy shocking real-life stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. I pressed my ear closer to the glass, holding my breath, trying not to make a sound. My wife's words cut straight through me. If you ever tell anyone about us, I swear you'll regret it. My blood froze. Us. She wasn't just scolding him about some family argument, she was threatening him to keep a secret. And then Mark shot back, his voice low but firm. You think I'm going to keep covering this up forever? You're insane. My chest tightened. My vision blurred. In that instant, I knew exactly what they were talking about. They weren't discussing money. They weren't discussing family drama. They were talking about an affair, a secret so dirty and disgusting it made me want to kick down that door and drag them both out into the street. My wife, my son-in-law, my daughter's husband. I staggered back from the window, hands shaking, my throat dry. My whole world spun like I was about to collapse right there in his yard. Everything we had built together, the years of marriage, the promises, the trust, it was all a lie. My wife had been sneaking behind my back with the one man who should have been untouchable. I forced myself to breathe, to calm down, to not act reckless. Because I knew one thing, if I stormed in right then and there, they would deny it. They'd make excuses, and worst of all, I wouldn't have proof. No, I couldn't just blow up. I had to be smarter. I had to be colder than the two of them combined. So I did the hardest thing a man can do. I turned and walked away. My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms, but I walked. Every step I took away from that house felt like fire in my veins. I didn't have a plan yet. I didn't know how I was going to do it. But one thing was certain, they were going to pay. Both of them. That night, lying in bed next to her while she pretended everything was normal, I stared at the ceiling with one thought repeating in my head. I'm not going to confront her. I'm going to destroy her. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table staring into my coffee, replaying every word I had heard the night before. My wife moved around the house as if nothing had happened. She hummed while she buttered her toast, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and asked if I had plans for the day. It was surreal. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her I knew everything. But instead, I forced a smile and said I had errands to run. I didn't leave for errands. I sat in my truck down the street, gripping the steering wheel, trying to wrap my head around the betrayal. I had to know how deep this went. One overheard conversation wasn't enough. I needed proof. Solid proof. If I confronted her now, she'd just twist the story, deny it, maybe even make me look crazy. No, I had to be smarter than both of them. So I started digging. The first thing I checked was her phone bill. I logged into the account while she was in the shower. My stomach sank when I saw the call logs, dozens of late-night calls to Mark's number. Some of them lasted hours. She had been lying next to me in bed, whispering to him while I slept a few feet away. That was the first crack in the dam. I pulled at the thread, and everything began to unravel. I went through her purse while she showered again the next morning. Receipts, hotel bookings. She had been using excuses about visiting her sister to spend nights with him. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. The dates lined up with every weekend she claimed she was helping with family stuff. My wife wasn't helping anyone. She was destroying us. The more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't some stupid fling. It had been going on for years. And here's the part that made my blood run cold. She had involved our daughter in her lies. She had told her, "Don't tell Dad I was with Uncle Mark. It's just a surprise thing I'm planning." Our daughter, Mark's own wife, had unknowingly covered for them. My wife had dragged her into their mess without a second thought. That discovery hit me harder than anything. It wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just my marriage that had been violated. They had poisoned my daughter's life too. I remember sitting alone in my car, staring at the evidence piled in the passenger seat. Printed call logs, copies of receipts, screenshots of messages. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. I had enough proof to burn her world to the ground. But proof wasn't enough. I didn't just want her to pay. I wanted her and Mark both to feel what it was like to lose everything. That night, I laid in bed again, pretending to sleep while she scrolled on her phone. Every fake laugh, every shallow goodnight, honey, made my skin crawl. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she could lie to me forever. But I had already made up my mind. I wasn't just going to leave her. I wasn't going to settle for half of our life in a messy divorce. No, I was going to take everything from her. I was going to turn her own secrets into a weapon so sharp it would cut them both out of my life for good. And the first step was to tell my daughter the truth. Telling my daughter was the hardest step I had ever taken in my life. How could I even begin? How do you sit down with your child and tell her that her husband, the man she built a life with, has been sneaking around with her own mother? I knew it would shatter her, but I also knew I couldn't keep it from her. She deserved the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I spent 3 days gathering everything I could find. I dug through financial records, collected hotel receipts, and printed text logs. I even installed a discreet tracking app on my wife's car. Every move she made confirmed my worst fears. She wasn't slowing down. She wasn't feeling guilty. If anything, she was becoming reckless. It was as if she thought no one would ever catch her. Meanwhile, I prepared myself for the conversation with my daughter. I imagined every possible reaction: denial, anger, grief, even turning against me. But in the end, I couldn't let her live in ignorance while her marriage rotted from the inside. I had to risk it. One evening, I asked her to meet me for coffee. She smiled when she walked in, the same bright smile she had since she was a little girl, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Life with Mark had been wearing her down. She thought it was just stress, long hours at work, maybe distance between them. She had no idea what the real cause was. We sat across from each other at the cafe, the smell of roasted beans thick in the air. My hands shook as I slid the envelope across the table. "Sweetheart," I said, my throat tight, "I need you to look at this. And I need you to stay calm." She frowned, confused, and pulled the papers out. Call logs, receipts, photos. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. And then it hit her. Her face went pale, her hands trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be real. Tell me this isn't real." "I wish I could," I said quietly, "but it's the truth. I found out a week ago. I've been digging since then. Your mother and Mark. It's been going on for a long time." She shook her head, covered her mouth, and let out a sound I'll never forget, a choked, broken cry that came from the deepest part of her soul. I reached across the table, but she pulled away. She didn't want comfort, she wanted answers. "How long?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Years," I admitted. "At least 3, maybe more. Every time your mom told me she was visiting her sister. She was with him." She sat there, frozen, the papers still in her hands. And then, slowly, she lowered them to the table and stared at me with fire in her eyes. "We can't let them get away with this." It was like something inside her snapped into place. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was my ally. She wanted revenge just as badly as I did. Right there in that cafe, between cold coffee cups and crumpled evidence, we made a silent pact. No shouting, no reckless confrontations, no sloppy outbursts. We were going to play it smart. We were going to take everything from them, piece by piece. The first step was patience. We couldn't tip them off. We couldn't let them know we were onto them. My wife and Mark thought they were clever. They thought they could manipulate us forever. But now the game had changed, and I promised myself, as I walked my daughter back to her car, that by the time we were finished, neither of them would recognize the life they once had. After that night in the cafe, everything changed between my daughter and me. We weren't just father and daughter anymore, we were partners. We had one goal, and it was bigger than our pain, bigger than our Shock. We were going to tear their little fantasy apart, piece by piece, until they had nothing left. But revenge isn't about explosions. It's not about screaming or throwing punches. It's about patience. It's about precision. And we both knew if we wanted to do this right, we had to stay invisible. The first step was information. My daughter already knew Mark's habits, his passwords, his routines, the way he thought. She started feeding me details quietly, little bits of knowledge that became weapons in the making. Where he went after work, which bars he stopped at, how often he checked his email. I handled my wife. I tracked her car, set up discreet cameras in the house, and backed up her text messages to the cloud without her knowing. Every move she made became another thread in the net I was weaving around her. We never discussed our plan over the phone. We only met in person, long walks, quiet dinners, drives out of town where nobody could overhear. We kept our voices low, like spies, because in a way, that's what we had become. The hardest part was playing normal. At home, my wife acted like the same loving partner she had always pretended to be. She kissed me goodnight, called me honey, asked about my day. Every word was poison, but I swallowed it down, because if I let my anger slip, if I so much as gave her a reason to suspect me, everything we were building would collapse. My daughter did the same. She smiled at Mark, she asked him about work, cooked dinner, even sat through movie nights with him on the couch. But under the surface, she was a bomb waiting to go off. She told me later that every touch, every kiss he gave her made her skin crawl, but she endured it for the plan. Within weeks, we had enough material to bury them. Screenshots of late-night texts, videos of my wife sneaking out in the middle of the night, records of hotel stays under fake names, but instead of rushing to use it, we held it back. Because timing was everything. We decided to bleed them slowly. Mark had a good job, one that relied on his reputation. My daughter started planting seeds of doubt with his colleagues' wives during casual conversations. Nothing direct, nothing obvious, just subtle hints about him working late or hanging out when he should have been home. Rumors spread faster than fire, and soon people at his office were whispering. I worked my side too. My wife had a few close friends she leaned on, women she trusted, so I made sure a little cracks started to show. I'd drop a line like, "She's been so busy lately, barely home at night," or I'd act confused when someone asked about her whereabouts. Those seeds sprouted fast. Friends started questioning her. Gossip followed her everywhere she went. We weren't just exposing them, we were isolating them, making sure that when the truth finally came out, they'd have no one to run to, no allies left to shield them. But here's the thing about playing the long game. You have to keep control. The longer we waited, the more dangerous it became. Because both of them were reckless, and reckless people make mistakes. Big ones. And when Mark slipped up, and believe me, he did, it gave us the perfect opening to take the next step. Mark's slip-up was exactly what we needed. One night, he told my daughter he had to stay late at work, but his car's GPS said otherwise. He wasn't at the office. He wasn't even in the same part of town. He was with my wife. My daughter sent me the screenshots in real time, and when I saw them, I knew the window had opened. We had caught them red-handed, and now it was time to set the stage for something bigger. We decided the reveal couldn't just be between us. It had to be public, it had to be undeniable, and it had to destroy both of them in one clean strike. That's when the idea hit me. A family gathering, a night where all eyes would be on them, where there'd be no excuses, no escape. The plan took weeks to arrange. I suggested to my wife that we host a dinner, something simple. Invite our daughter and Mark, a few close relatives, even some family friends. My wife loved the idea. She thought it would make us look like the picture-perfect couple. Little did she know, she was agreeing to step into her own execution. Meanwhile, I upgraded the house, tiny cameras hidden in vents, mixed tucked into the corners of the living room, all feeding into a cloud drive only I could access. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. When the night came, every smirk, every nervous glance, every word would be captured. My daughter played her role perfectly. She smiled at Mark, pretended to be the doting wife, and even suggested dishes to bring for the dinner. She was ice under fire, calm while her whole life was being gutted from the inside. That girl had more strength than I ever imagined. But here's the thing about traps, you can't spring them too early. So in the weeks leading up to the dinner, we turned the screws tighter. I began dropping subtle comments to my wife, pretending to be clueless but planting little hooks. Funny how Mark's always around when you are, I'd say with a chuckle. She'd stiffen, then laugh it off, but I could see the panic flicker in her eyes. My daughter did the same with Mark. She started asking innocent questions like, "How was work? Did you stay late again?" His answers grew shorter, sharper. He was unraveling. That was what we wanted. By the time the dinner came, they would both be so on edge that the smallest spark would blow everything open. And while they scrambled to keep their lies straight, I worked quietly in the background, moving money, securing assets, lining up legal documents. When the dust finally settled, I didn't just want revenge. I wanted to walk away with everything intact while they crawled out with nothing. The night of the dinner was approaching. The invitations were out. Everyone was coming. My wife was excited, thinking she was hosting a celebration of family. Mark was tense, sensing the walls closing in. My daughter and I were calm, because we knew what was about to happen. The table was set. The cameras were rolling, the stage was ready. And neither of them had the faintest idea that their entire world was about to come crashing down. The days leading up to the dinner were some of the most surreal of my life. On the surface, everything looked normal. My wife was busy cleaning the house, setting the menu, and obsessing over the smallest details like what flowers to put on the table. She was excited, almost giddy, but beneath that smile, I could see the unease creeping in, the small hesitations, the nervous glances, the way her voice sometimes cracked when she spoke. Mark was worse. My daughter told me he'd been restless, snapping at her over nothing, drinking more than usual. He was distracted, paranoid. He kept asking questions like, "Your dad's not suspicious, is he? Or you don't think anyone knows, right?" My daughter would smile sweetly and shake her head, but inside she was watching him unravel, piece by piece. That was the beauty of our plan. We didn't have to scream or accuse. All we had to do was let them feel the walls closing in. And the more they felt it, the sloppier they became. One night, my wife came to bed late, she thought. I was asleep, but I watched her out of the corner of my eye. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone, her hands trembling. She typed something, then deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Finally, she locked the screen and shoved it under her pillow. I could practically hear her heart pounding from across the bed. Meanwhile, my daughter told me that Mark had started avoiding her altogether. He'd stay in his office late into the night, sometimes not even coming home until after midnight. When she asked what he was doing, he'd snap back, "Work stuff, you wouldn't understand." She didn't press. She didn't need to. She knew he was spiraling. And here's the thing. When people start to spiral, they make mistakes, big ones. Mark made his at work. He slipped up during a meeting, snapping at a superior in front of the entire team. Rumors about his behavior spread fast. People started whispering about him being unstable, unreliable. Exactly the kind of whispers that would come back to haunt him. My wife's mistake was smaller, but just as telling. She snapped at one of her closest friends over the phone, a woman she usually leaned on. My wife was defensive, jumpy, almost hysterical. That friend called me later, concerned. She said, "I don't know what's going on with her, but she's not herself. Something's wrong." I bit back a smile and said, "Yeah, I've noticed it too." Another seed planted. By the week of the dinner, both of them were wrecks. Mark barely spoke in complete sentences, pacing the house like a caged animal. My wife was glued to her phone, constantly checking messages, as if waiting for the world to collapse. They didn't know what was coming, but they could feel it. And that's when I knew we had them. The night before the dinner, I stood in the kitchen, watching my wife carefully arrange silverware at the table. She thought she was preparing for a beautiful evening with family, but every fork she placed, every napkin she folded, was another nail in her coffin. When she finally looked up and smiled at me, I smiled back. And I thought to myself, tomorrow, it all ends. The closer we got to the dinner, the more I realized one thing. Exposure wasn't enough. I couldn't just humiliate them in front of family and friends. If I really wanted this to stick, if I wanted them to pay, I needed to hit them where it hurt most, their security, their comfort, their future. So while my wife polished silverware and Mark drowned himself in paranoia, I got to work building the foundation of their downfall, the paper trail. First, the finances. Over the years, my wife had access to our joint accounts, but she never bothered to really pay attention. I began quietly shifting assets out of reach, moving funds into separate accounts under my name, securing property, titles, and lining up legal protections. By the time she would realize what was happening, it would already be too late. Then came the receipts. I had a thick folder now, stacked with hotel bills, credit card statements, phone logs, and messages. But it wasn't just about collecting them, it was about organizing them, making sure each piece painted a perfect picture of betrayal. If this ever went to court, I wanted there to be no wiggle room, no excuse she could throw at me. Mark wasn't safe either. Through my daughter, we uncovered how he'd been using company resources for his little getaways, expense accounts that didn't match, unexplained charges, hours logged that he clearly hadn't worked. My daughter had friends inside his company, and word was already spreading. If HR got their hands on the evidence, his career would be shredded. But I didn't stop there. I met with a lawyer. I laid everything on the table, the documents, the recordings, the photos. The lawyer didn't even blink. He just looked at me and said, "If this is real, you'll walk away clean. She won't get a dime more than the court forces, and he'll lose his job." That was all I needed to hear. The trick was timing. If I moved too soon, they'd catch wind of it. If I waited too long, something might slip. But the dinner, that was the perfect moment. Not just to reveal the truth, but to deliver the first strike of the legal hammer. Meanwhile, my wife went on, smiling, planning the menu, asking if we should serve red or white wine. She had no idea that while she was fussing over appetizers, I was setting fire to her entire world. The night before the dinner, I sat alone in my office, looking over the thick stack of evidence spread out across my desk. I ran my hand over the papers, feeling the weight of it all. This wasn't just proof. This was justice. And as I placed the divorce papers on top of the pile, ready to be served the very next day, I whispered to myself, tomorrow, the masks come off. Tomorrow, she finds out who she's really married to. The night of the dinner finally arrived. The table was set, the glasses polished, the food arranged neatly across the counter. My wife moved around the kitchen like the perfect hostess, humming to herself, her face glowing with false happiness. To anyone else, she looked like a woman preparing to celebrate her family. But I knew better. Every dish she served, every smile she forced, was built on a foundation of rot. Guests began arriving just after 6. First, a few relatives, cousins and aunts who carried bottles of wine and warm smiles. Then family friends, shaking hands, laughing, catching up. My daughter walked in last, arm in arm with Mark. She wore a calm, practiced smile, but her eyes met mine for just a moment, steady, unflinching. She was ready. Mark looked like a man walking into his own funeral without realizing it. He forced small talk, shook hands, even cracked a couple of nervous jokes, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted around the room, scanning faces, searching for danger. He knew something was wrong, he just didn't know what. We all gathered in the dining room. Candles flickered on the table, the air smelled of roasted meat and herbs, and soft music played in the background. My wife clinked her glass for attention. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said warmly. "It means the world to us to have family and friends together under one roof." She looked around proudly, as if she were the queen of the castle. I almost laughed. Dinner began, and conversations filled the room. At first, it was light. Cousins chatted about work, friends joked about old times, and glasses clinked with wine. But underneath the chatter, there was an undercurrent of tension. I could feel it in my chest, that electric charge before a storm breaks. My daughter played her part perfectly. She asked Mark about his day, laughed at his weak jokes, even touched his arm lightly like a devoted wife. But I could see the steel in her eyes. Every touch was calculated, every smile rehearsed. She wasn't loving him. She was setting him up. As the evening went on, the cracks began to show. Mark grew quieter, his hand twitching on the stem of his glass. He was drinking faster than usual, and his face flushed red. My wife kept glancing at him across the table, quick, nervous looks. She thought nobody noticed, but I noticed. My daughter noticed, and so did a few of the guests, who exchanged confused glances. The beauty of it was simple. We didn't have to force anything. Their own guilt was eating them alive. Every time Mark tried to speak, his voice faltered. Every time my wife laughed, it sounded just a little too sharp, a little too rehearsed. They were unraveling, right there in front of everyone, without even realizing it. At one point, one of the relatives asked my wife where she'd been the other weekend. She froze for half a second, just half a second, but long enough for Emmy to see the panic flash in her eyes. She covered quickly, laughing it off with some flimsy excuse, but the seed of doubt was already planted in the room. People noticed. I sat back in my chair, silent, watching it all unfold. My daughter caught my eye, and for a moment, the two of us shared the same thought. They're hanging themselves without us lifting a finger. And yet, I knew the best was still to come. Because while they struggled to hold their lies together, I had the final card in my pocket, the recordings, the evidence, the truth, ready to be unleashed in front of every single person in that room. The dinner dragged on, laughter sounding thinner, smiles growing tighter, the air heavier with each passing minute. And I sat there, calm, composed, waiting for the right moment. Tomorrow would be too late. Yesterday was too soon. But tonight was perfect. The dinner had dragged on long enough. The lies, the fake smiles, the shallow conversations, it was time. My chest was tight, my palms were sweating under the table, but my mind was clear. I had waited for this moment. Every step, every calculated move had led to right now. I raised my glass, tapping it lightly with a fork. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. My wife smiled, thinking I was about to toast. Poor woman. She had no idea. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, I began. My voice was steady, calm, too calm. It means a lot to me to have all of you here. Family, friends, loved ones. But I think it's only fair that when we gather like this, we're honest with each other. Don't you agree? There were nods, murmurs of agreement. My wife shifted uncomfortably beside me. Mark's jaw tightened. I reached under the table and pressed a small button on my phone. Within seconds, the speakers in the living room clicked on, and a familiar voice filled the room. If you ever tell anyone about us, I swear you'll regret it. The voice was my wife's, crystal clear, sharp, desperate. The room froze. Forks clinked against plates. Someone gasped. And then, Mark's voice followed, low and tense. You think I'm going to keep covering this up forever? You're insane. The sound echoed through the house like a bomb. My wife's face went white as a sheet. Mark's glass slipped from his hand, shattering across the table. For a long, terrible moment, no one said a word. The only sound was the recording, playing over and over again, my wife and Mark exposing themselves in their own words. Finally, I stood. That, I said evenly, is what I've been living with. That's what my daughter has been living with. While you all thought we were a family, they've been sneaking around behind our backs for years. Murmurs rippled through the table. My wife stammered. It's not what it sounds like. Shut your mouth, I snapped, louder than I'd ever spoken to her. The entire room went dead silent. Don't you dare insult everyone here by lying again. It's exactly what it sounds like. Mark tried to stand, his face red with panic, but my daughter was quicker. She slammed a folder onto the table, photos, receipts, printed text messages spilling out. These are your hotel bills, Mark. These are your calls at 2 in the morning. This is every time you told me you were working late. Her voice shook, but her eyes burned with fury. The guests leaned forward, whispering, staring, shocked. My wife buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Mark muttered something under his breath, then pushed back his chair and stormed toward the door. You're not going anywhere, I called after him. Not until you hear this. I pulled another set of papers from my jacket and slapped them onto the table. Divorce papers, signed, filed, effective immediately. You won't take my house, my money, or my dignity with you. All you're leaving. With his shame, gasps filled the room. My wife reached for the papers, her hands trembling, her face streaked with tears. She tried to speak, but no words came out. And you, Mark, I continued, my voice cutting through the air like a blade, might want to start polishing your resume. Because HR is about to get some very interesting documents about how you've been spending company time and money. His head snapped toward me, eyes wide. He opened his mouth to protest, but my daughter cut him off. Save it. We're done. She ripped her wedding ring off her finger and tossed it across the table. It bounced once and landed in front of him with a sharp clang. The room was chaos now. Guests whispered. Some shook their heads, others stared in disbelief. The carefully constructed image of our happy family had just been obliterated in front of everyone. I looked at my wife one last time. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built my life with, now sat trembling, exposed, destroyed. "Dinner's over," I said quietly. "Get out of my house." And with that, she collapsed into sobs. Mark grabbed his coat and fled without another word. My daughter stood tall beside me, tears in her eyes but her chin high. We had done it. The masks were gone, the truth was out, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The house felt different after that night. Quieter, lighter, almost like the walls themselves had exhaled a breath they'd been holding for years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could walk through my own home without feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. My wife was gone within a week. She tried calling, begging for forgiveness, but I never answered. The divorce moved quickly, thanks to the mountain of evidence I had stacked against her. She walked away with almost nothing. Mark didn't fare any better. Word spread fast at his company, and within a month, he was out of a job. The same friends and family who once thought he was charming now avoided him like the plague. My daughter, she amazed me. I thought the betrayal would crush her, but instead, she rose from the ashes stronger than ever. She filed for divorce from Mark the very next day after the dinner. Watching her stand tall in court, refusing to let him manipulate her one more time, was one of the proudest moments of my life. In the months that followed, she and I grew closer than we had been in years. We shared dinners, long conversations, and even laughter again. The bond that had been tested by lies and betrayal had only grown stronger. As for me, I focused on rebuilding. I sold the house and moved to a new city, somewhere fresh, where the memories didn't claw at me every time I opened a door. I started taking better care of myself, cooking meals, going to the gym, even traveling a little. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. I was living for me. And here's the thing I learned: revenge doesn't always mean shouting or breaking things. Sometimes the best revenge is patience. It's letting the truth do the work for you. And once the truth came out, they destroyed themselves. I didn't need to lift a finger, just hold up the mirror. I'll be honest. There are still nights when I lie awake, thinking about all the years I wasted loving someone who never really loved me back. But then I remember the freedom I have now, the peace, the strength I found in myself and in my daughter, and I realize I didn't lose, I won. Because I walked away with my dignity, and they'll never get theirs back. So here I am, a new man with a new life, happier, freer, and wiser than I've ever been. And now I want to ask you, did I do the right thing? What would you have done if you were in my place? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more shocking real-life tales like it, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Hit that like button, and tell me in the comments what you think, because I'm dying to hear your take.